when you're looking at some of these day 2, day 3 guys, just tell me some guys that are standouts as far as that, and then we'll hone in on maybe who the Cowboys should get.
Well, if you're talking wide receiver, a guy that I like, if probably not a day 1 pick, but maybe like a Savion Williams out of TCU.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, this guy is a freak of nature. When I'm looking at guys that are valuable, especially like day 2, day 3 picks, you want a guy who's an all-around athlete, not just like a guy that's going to do you 1 or 2 good things, a guy that's more than just a skill set. He has to be someone who can do multiple things, and that's what Williams can do. I mean, he was at the Wildcat a lot for TCU, had 6 touchdowns on the ground, and then not to mention what he's capable of, obviously, through the air in the passing game. That's the kind of player that I want if I'm the Cowboys, especially if you're not going to get a freak of nature in the first round. I think he could be a very valuable pick in day 2 or maybe day 3.
So kind of going on Savion Williams, some of the stuff we've heard about him is maybe not the best in the classroom, a little bit of some bonehead mistakes. Maybe he can't pick up the playbook as well. Just any comments on that? And then as well as his running mate, Jack Besh, who had a great a showing at the Senior Bowl, at the Reese's Senior Bowl. He's also got some great rides. Kind of what do you think of him?
Oh, I love Jack Besh. Originally at Louisiana State University, that was a guy that I thought was underrated coming out of high school. He was a 3-star. But a lot of LSU fans were really high on him coming out of high school, and they were wondering why he wasn't a 4-star. And I quite frankly totally believed them in that theory. And so I think he's a guy that you don't really have to show.
Day 2, day 3, where they're going to have to make their money at. I want to say, 44 and 76 are the 2 picks that come to mind, second and third round. If from looking at whether it's D-tackle, linebacker, safety, maybe even a running back, what position group that you've seen kind of sticks out the most as far as having the most quality depth where you can get a day 1 starter in rounds 2 and 3?
Running back. Well, if you're talking rounds 2 and 3, the running back room is just so deep this year. I mean, you've probably got 12, maybe even up to 15 guys who are legit. And I think could be maybe like maybe half of those guys could be day 1 impact guys for whatever team that they go on. I mean, obviously Ashton Genty, but I think Amarion Hampton is getting slept on. If Hampton didn't play for North Carolina, I think we'd be looking at Hampton the same way that we're looking at Genty. It just happens to be that Genty played for Boise State, made the playoff, obviously. I think Hampton is one of the best all-around backs from this past college football season. He can pass block. He's obviously a really good running back on the ground. He's not going to go down with the first guy that hits him. He's electric in the open field, very, very fast, and he's also good out of the backfield as a pass catcher. I mean, is he as good as a Genty? No, but what I'm saying is I think we'd be shedding similar light on him like we are Genty. But I think the running back room is just so hard to beat this year from college football, and that's such a great thing because I don't think the quarterback class is all that good, but obviously we're going to be having Dak Prescott. I say we. Cowboys are going to be having Dak Prescott again for this coming year, at least for another year. So it's a good thing that they're not having to go after a quarterback. But if you're looking for a defensive tackle, second round, like maybe high 40s or low 40s, high 50s, what about Collins from Texas, staying in state here? Collins, a former 5-star, but he's got so much potential. And when you're looking at these day 2, day 3 picks, you want the guys who have value, obviously, but the guys who can also give you that long-term sustainable success. And you have to remember, a lot of these high 4-star and maybe lower-end 5-star players that don't really turn out in college, maybe in terms of production, but they still have all that potential, those are the guys that are going to give you a ton of value in the draft.
Yeah.
And that's a Collins. And, of course, that's if the Cowboys the Cowboys don't pick up, say, like a Shamar Stewart out of Texas A&M, someone that only had 4.5 sacks in his career, but was regarded as one of the best pass rushing prospects coming out of high school back in the class of 2022, Walter Nolan out of Ole Miss. And there's obviously some other defensive tackles we can mention before Collins, but if you're just looking from a value perspective and guys who are most likely to still be on the board, that's a guy that I'd be looking at.
When you look at last year's draft, you saw a lot of guys in the second round make an impact for their team. The Cowboys drafted, obviously, Marshawn Nealon last year. If you had your pick of the litter for their second and third round pick, and can't say Amarian Hampton, are you a Trayvon Henderson or Caleb Johnson kind of guy? Do you think there's some good linebacker stuff here? We know the Cowboys are kind of weak in the linebacker spot. If you were Cowboys GM, who are you picking rounds 2 and 3?
Gosh, that's a great question. Well, we can mention someone from We Are Penn State that's had a ton of success here in Dallas. So how about We Are Marshall? What about Mike Green from the Thundering Herd?
Green. You think he'll be there in the second, though?
I think there's a chance of that. I mean, do some of these GMs take a chance on a G5 guy?
Yeah.
I would say they will, only because I think they will for two reasons. One, you've seen where you could have smaller school guys succeed, and then secondly, the fact that he did so well in the in the Senior Bowl. Well, let me ask you, do you think that would factor in the fact that he did so well in the Senior Bowl?
Oh, absolutely. I think he certainly put himself on the map. It's just still a question, like, do they grade one performance or do they value an entire season? Of course, he obviously had a great season. He led the country in sacks. So that's a good question if he's still going to be available. If he is, though, that's certainly a guy that I would go after. If he's not available, what's the chance that maybe like a Derek Harmon out of Oregon, former Michigan State Spartan, he was really active on the interior defensive line for a few years in college football, another high-floor guy. And if you're looking at the Cowboys, I think we ultimately want to see more toughness out of them.
Yep.
I think they got some finesse to them, but I think when you look at them this past year, I think a lot of it just came down to mental and physical toughness. And I think Derek Harmon brings that side of the football. He's got that physical toughness to him. He's also mentally tough. So he's a guy that I'd be looking at, too, on the interior defensive line. But if you're looking at pass rusher outside of like a Shamar Stewart, who's probably not going to be available, again, like I mentioned earlier, I would obviously look at Mike Green if he's still on the board.
Wide receivers, another group that, depending upon what you're looking for, again, I don't know if at number 12, if a Luther Burden's there, I think a Golden's probably that's a little bit of a high of a spot. Now, if you can trade back, that would be fantastic. But again, we're looking at in that day 2, day 3 range. How do you feel about the wide receiver group?
I don't think the wide receiver group is as special this season. I certainly think there's a top group there. I want to go back to, what you said about Caleb Johnson out of Iowa real quick. I think Caleb Johnson's also getting slept on. He's not as good as a few of the top backs this year in the NFL draft, but I think Johnson, what he can do, think about Caleb Johnson real quick. He played for Iowa. How good is Iowa's offense? How good are the players around
Not great.
him? Right. And Caleb Johnson absolutely put the offense on his back, at least, no pun intended, and he was able to carry Iowa's offense for the entire season. Without Caleb Johnson, Iowa's probably a 500 team. Of course, they can still score some points defensively. We know that. But Caleb Johnson is a special guy, and he's someone that he doesn't have to have elite talent around him to be great, similar to an Ashton Genty. But again, Genty, Hampton, they're not going to be available at this point. Caleb Johnson might be, and that's a guy that I would consider. But when you're looking at the wide receiver group, I mentioned it earlier. I would take a chance on Savion Williams. I think he's going to be available because I don't think people are going to really take him seriously because of his up and down and his inconsistency. Maybe they will. Maybe they'll take a chance on him. But to me, Savion Williams seems like a Cowboys kind of pick.
Now let's transition to the other side of the ball. Let's look at the defensive backs. Travis Hunter will obviously be gone. But when you get to pick 12, and especially in the second round, when you're looking at, pick 44, there's going to be obviously a bunch of defensive backs available. Some that have been coming up. We got Will Johnson, Jahdae Barron, which will be probably close to late first round, early second. You got Revel Jr. out of ECU, Malachi Starks out of Georgia, and then the Notre Dame boys. And also our boy Mabuka out of Texas. When you look at that safety and corner spot for the Cowboys, whether it's age, whether it's not great performance, whether it's injuries, they kind of need help in the secondary as well. Who do you think fits the best for the Dallas Cowboys in that spot, and how early would you take a defensive back?
I think Malachi Starks, first of all, would be a tremendous fit because he would immediately, in my opinion, be an upgrade over a Donovan Wilson or a Malik Hooker.
Yep.
He would add some much-needed playmaking skills on the back end. So that would be the ideal kind of guy. If you can't get Will Johnson, because Will Johnson, if it wasn't for his injury, he'd be getting hyped for a top 5 pick, and he still might be a top 5, top 10 pick. But if you can't get a Will Johnson, I'd look at a Malachi Starks. Any guy out of Georgia that just has that upside right now. I mean, look at the Eagles. They just won a Super Bowl with pretty much half of its roster being from Georgia. Feels like, at least. And so I think Starks would be an incredible fit for the Cowboys right off the bat. And
good in the run as well.
Say that again?
I said he's good in run and then in the run as well.
Yes. And Starks would be somebody that it wouldn't just be a long-term fix here. You could get an immediate need and play him meaningful snaps from the get-go. So if I'm the Cowboys, Starks, you can't get Will Johnson, is the first defensive back that I'm looking at.
No love for my boy Jahdae Barron out of the corner out of Texas, top corner. I love how he played in those big games against Georgia. No love for my boy Jahdae.
Oh, I like Barron, but
what's his knock? Talk to us. What's his knock?
But for me with Texas this past year, and Bud Elliott from 24/7 Sports said this several times on the Cover 3 podcast throughout the college football season, Texas defense really didn't get tested a whole lot this past season. And when they stepped up and played tougher competition, Barron still stood out, especially compared to the other secondary members from the UT defense. But to me, Starks, for the Cowboys, he just seems like a better fit and more of a flashy kind of guy that would make more meaningful plays for the Cowboys right off the bat than Barron would. But I don't think Barron's a bad fit. I would have Barron probably like third or fourth on my list for the Cowboys if you're looking at defensive backs. It's not like he's bad. It's just I think Starks is a home run hit.
Tight end's a position that, depending upon who you talk to, some feel like, hey, this Cowboy team could use a tight end. I'm not ready to kick Jake Ferguson to the curb just yet, especially considering that he may have been a little more banged up than we realized last year. And, oh, by the way, you had Cooper Rush throwing to him. How do you feel about, I know Tyler Warren, we got the kid from Bowling Green, the Michigan kid. So, you got some pieces out there. Is there anybody, like I said, on that second or third day that's jumping out at you?
That is a really good question.
We got his brother, Terrence Ferguson, at Oregon.
Well, what about a guy like Colston Loveland out of Michigan? Colston Loveland was a guy that was getting hyped up this past preseason.
Yeah.
Didn't have great numbers this past year because the Michigan quarterback room and the offensive line, really the entire offense, was not that good. But Colston Loveland also had some injuries. But to me, when I go back and look at these NFL drafts over the last several years, you could probably go back 10 or 15 years, really, the guys who end up breaking through, it's almost like that guy. And he was getting hyped up 1 year ago before his last year in college football. He just didn't break through like everybody thought he would, so he ended up dropping back down to like day 2 or day 3. That could be like a Colston Loveland.
Okay.
He just kind of got this slightly bit forgotten because of the lack of players and playmaking guys around him for Michigan's offense this past year. So to me, it's like, let's not forget that just several months ago, he was getting hyped up as probably the best tight end, or at least the second best tight end in college football after Tyler Warren. So that'd be a guy that I would consider. I also like Gunnar Helm out of Texas. When you think about Texas football this past year, you think about like their defensive line, how fast their linebackers are. By the way, Texas was really young at linebacker this past year, so that's kind of scary. But you also think about their offense being efficient. Like, they weren't as explosive, I think, as last year's offense. But remember who Texas went to on third down? Like, anytime they had a big third down play, they went to Gunnar Helm. So I think that's another guy that could be productive. Do I think he's as athletic as a Colston Loveland or a Harold Fandon, obviously a Tyler Warren? No. But I think that's a guy that can be kind of a high floor kind of guy.
All right, you said you're covering DFW area high school basketball. I just spent a football season covering Texas high school football. Who are one of the two of the better teams you've seen thus far in the DFW on the hardwood?
Well, I've covered a lot of 4 and 5A.
Okay.
The last couple of weeks, I've covered some 6A. I'll tell you guys one team that I've been really impressed with. Not a great district record. Of course, they play in a district with Duncanville and Lancaster, but they're a relatively young team. They came into the season with a couple of their top players gone from last year's team, so they didn't have high expectations, but they just beat DeSoto in back-to-back games this past Friday and Saturday. and that's the Waxahachie Indians.
Okay.
Again, a relatively young team, a lot of contributing sophomores and juniors on that team. But if they can keep a couple of their better players from going to another high school, now I don't know how.
Hey, do we have a Texas high school transfer portal issue? I mean, is that what you're telling me right now? Is NIL going on? I mean, I wouldn't be surprised.
You know what NIL was before NIL in college football? That's kind of like what's happening right now in Texas athletics around the high school level.
$100 handshakes. Is that what you're telling me right now? You tell me there's $100 handshakes going on?
Potentially. I mean, I don't have any sources on that, but I do know that Waxahachie lost their two best players from last year, and neither of them went to the college level, at least for the time being. So, but a guy that I really like for Waxahachie right now, he's a junior. We'll see if he comes back for his senior year, and that's Trey Nunn. He's about 6'5", 205, an athletic freak. He's got a couple of D1 offers right now. UTSA, I believe Oregon's looking at him as well. But this Waxahachie team, so they went 7-7 in the regular season in their district play this past season before, in the regular season before, beating DeSoto in what was a play-in game for the playoff for the top four teams to make it. But of those 7 losses, 6 of them were by single digits.
Oof.
So they were better than their record. In fact, a lot of their wins, they blew their opponents out. So to me, this team was better than their record, and then they still have room for growth. So like this wasn't a team that eked out 7-7. If anything, they were unfortunate to be 7-7. So they should have been better. And next year, again, if they have that continuity returning, then they'll only be that much better. And obviously Lancaster, Duncanville, they've been the class of that district these last couple of years, actually last several years with Duncanville, and then here most recently with Lancaster. But they could be that best of the rest breakthrough team for next year.
Connor, tell the folks at home where they can find you at on X and all the socials.
Well, on Instagram, that's where I'm most active with my college football page. It is CFE Grind, College Football Encyclopedia Grind. And then they can also find my face, if they want to not just listen to my voice but see my face. They can find me on the Gridiron Expert YouTube channel this coming later spring and summer. I'm going to be interviewing a bunch of college football beat writers to discuss their rosters for the upcoming college football season.
Love to hear it, my friend. Connor, always great stuff having you come on, talking a little college football, throwing a little Texas high school stuff in there as well. We'll do this again as we get closer to the draft.
Well, I appreciate the call, and I always enjoy being on here with y'all. Thank you very much.